Greetings, YouTube. Just today, I had someone on DeviantArt ask me how I got into making weapons. Now, long time ago, I used to sketch all the time, like every day I sketched, and I sketched weapons. And it was interesting if you looked at my sketches over the time I was sketching. They started out where I would have a page, piece of graph paper, and I always sketched on graph paper. That grid helped me from having paralysis of looking at that white page. It also helped layout. But if you look at those early sketches, they're this big. I could get a dozen on a page. And as time went by, they get bigger, bigger, and bigger. Till when I finally got to the point where I wasn't really sketching any longer, they were diagonal across the page, taking up the entire thing. I owned this space at that point. I also got pretty good at sketching. I can remember somebody once asking me what digital tool I used for my wood grain, and I said a pencil because I just used to draw it. Um, but then I moved in here, and suddenly I had my own space. This was mine. And I started out making things here in my office and out there on the porch because it was a space I could work where I can make a little bit of a mess and not too worry about it too much. And then I discovered the angle grinder, and the angle grinder became my best friend. I love my angle grinder. It is at times an extension of my hand. I feel such a sense of comfort and control of that device now as compared to when I did starting. And once I had an angle grinder, I could now shape metal. I could cut it. I could put edges on it. I could put curves on it. I could put edges on things. Between cutoff wheels and grinding wheels and flap wheels, suddenly I had an entire plethora of things available to me. And then I set up a shop in my basement, and it got larger and larger over time. I got a drill press. I got a grinding machine. I got a belt grinder. I got a cutoff saw for metal. It's an abrasive cutoff saw for metal. Though in retrospect, I probably would have been better off getting one of the stationary cutoff bandsaws, which are bandsaws that are mounted so that they hinge, so the whole arm goes up and down like this, as opposed to like most woodworking bandsaws are like this, and you push the work into the blade. Well, metal cutoffs, you put the material in a vise, and the blade lands on it, and it just floods it with coolant, and it just goes, and just the weight of the arm pushes the blade slowly through the material. There's a piston to regulate the speed. Um, that probably would have been a better deal for me, because sometimes I do stress my cutoff wheels a bit too much. I could be cutting some big things on those. And I began to think in terms of what around me can I turn into weapons? And I began to see inspiration everywhere. And some of it was because what I found, items that I would literally get as salvage, or I'd get as deals at yard sales or flea markets or at estate sales. And I would see things online. I'm like, oh, I can make that. Or I could make one of those. And as time went on, I began to compile my own stash of supplies and my own stash of tools. I eventually built a second workbench after having purchased a pre-made one. I began to just recently, I've set up some more organization in my shop for fasteners. Though while the fasteners are now on a wall, they aren't organized quite the way I want them yet. And I still need to put a few more layers of organization on one area, but I'm working on that. And I got to the point where making something like this is a very fast job for me. This particular piece right here is 2 gears, a hole there for a pin, and then I just bolt it together. I just lag bolt, done. This is like an hour's worth of work for me now. I made a mace today at the time of this filming, And between finding the items in my shop and having the mace finished took me 5 minutes. I've just gotten to the point where I see things and suddenly I have an idea what I want to do and I can do it. But then again, there's the question is, why do I do it? Well, sometimes it's because my fascination with weapons has existed forever. I began to collect information and research information about weapons when I was 12, and I never stopped. I have a significant repertoire of reference books on a shelf in the other room, um, and I have thousands of reference pictures on my hard drive that I've accumulated over the years. Not to mention all the sketches I made gave me inspiration of my own. I've created things that I wanted to own. I created things that I've never seen and I wanted to. And I have the capacity to do it. The only thing I don't have the capacity to do at this time is weld. And that is something I want to do because welding is the last thing I need to do to achieve all of my personal goals. Being able to cut metal in different ways, being able to put metal together in different ways, all of that can be accomplished if I know how to weld, and even better if I can get my hands on a plasma cutter. Plasma cutters are cool, man. Um, that would be my dream, to have the equipment I need at hand to do the cutting and the welding that would let me do pretty much anything. I would suddenly have the capacity. It would help if I had my own mill, which I will probably never own, and my own lathe, also I will probably never own. But it would be cool to have those. But even without them, welding would help me a lot. I may have my own full-size industrial upright drill press someday. That is something I really want. I currently have a half horsepower drill press, which it's a big shop stand style. It doesn't sit all the way on the floor, but it's not as robust as I would like. You have to change the belts physically, which is a pain in the butt. I would like to have something that switches the belts themselves or has a gear ratio in there that I could just dial it in to where I want it for speeds. But having a bigger, you know, uh, work surface on a large upright built drill press would also be useful. I currently have my drill press, the base is I think about that big, the little where your tables, so you bolt things down or use magnets and stuff to hold things in place. I create stuff I want. I create stuff because it's art. It's dangerous art, but it's art. And it's art I can make, and art I really thoroughly enjoy creating. I cannot tell you the serotonin burst I get when something that is in here ends up here and it looks just the same. Not all my pieces do. Between the translation between what I think it should look like and what it has to look like because of the materials I'm using and the limits of my skill or my limits of my ability to machine things, they don't always match. Sometimes they do. And when they do, I can literally be at my workbench giggling because it's just so darn cool when I pull it off and I pull it off well. So that's why I make things. That's why I create stuff, because I can and because I have the skill and they've gotten better over time. I have the shop and I have the enjoyment of it. So that's why I make weapons, because the creativity's in me. Weapons are my medium. They are my art. They are my expression. And a lot of the time, they are my joy.